Welcome to the Monitor's Mic, where we talk oversight, policing, and you. I'm Stella Smith, your host in the Independent Police Monitor for the City of New Orleans, and with me is Chriselle Williams, our Deputy Police Monitor. This show is your go-to source for discussing policing, law enforcement oversight, and how it all impacts you. We're here to inform and empower you by unraveling the complexities of policing, updating you on the consent decree, and engaging in conversations that matter on policing oversight in the community. From the Office of the Independent Police Monitor, we offer an independent perspective on city government. The Office of the Independent Police Monitor, OIPM, serves as a crucial civilian oversight board for the New Orleans Police Department. We ensure transparency and accountability within the police department by making sure that NOPD follows their policies, abides by the consent decree, and is compliant with all local, state, and federal laws. Our office operates independently from the NOPD and the federal monitors, allowing us to provide an impartial perspective on policing practices and investigations. What do we do day to day? We take complaints of officer misconduct from the public and from police officers. We review misconduct investigations conducted by the NOPD's Internal Affairs, which is called the Public Integrity Bureau. We're on call 24 hours a day, every day of the year for officer-involved shootings and critical incidents, and we'll go on the scene and monitor the force investigation from start to finish. We're advisory members of the Use of Force Review Board and the disciplinary hearings. We run the Community Police Mediation Program, and we engage the community to ensure your voice, opinions, and concerns are heard. We, your hosts, are not police officers, but we are experienced lawyers from the criminal legal field, dedicated to transparency and accountability. We encourage you to call in with your questions, comments, and concerns. While we may not be able to address individual cases, we are committed to following up with you. So with that, let's learn more about today's guests. Chriselle?
Today, we are joined by two wonderful guests, Deputy Superintendent Nicholas Gernon and Miss Annette Cranford Hamilton. Deputy Superintendent Nicholas Gernon leads the New Orleans Police Department, NOPD, Professional Standards and Accountability Bureau, PSAB. Deputy Chief Gernon was born in Washington, D.C., but grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana. He joined the New Orleans Police Department in 2002. He first worked in the 1st District in night patrol before being promoted to burglary detective. He has also worked as a narcotics and violent crime detective and from 2007 to 2009 as a homicide detective. Gernon was promoted to sergeant in 2009 in the 8th District and rejoined homicide as a sergeant in 2012. In August 2015, Gernon was promoted to lieutenant and moved to the 6th District. In November 2016, he was again promoted and started leading districts and divisions including the 8th District, 7th District, and the Crime Lab. For the last 2 years, Deputy Superintendent Gernon has played a crucial role as the primary liaison between the City of New Orleans, the Department of Justice, and the consent decree monitors as the leader of PSAB. Under his leadership, PSAB monitors progress compliance with the consent decree, conducts all audits of the department's functions under the consent decree, coordinates the exchange of data, documents, and access among all relevant parties. The Bureau ensures that departmental operations adhere to established rules, regulations, orders, and policies. Additionally, PSAB writes and monitors the implementation of all departmental regulations, orders, and policies. Annette Cranford Hamilton is a dedicated community activist and organizer committed to enhancing the quality of life for children. She envisions a community where economic, educational, and social empowerment come together to nurture youth, recognizing that they are the leaders of tomorrow. She believes that to thrive, they must have access to the best support and resources available. Annette has made significant contributions through her involvement in various organizations, including founding Pretty Patty's Pretty Girls Club, co-founding New Orleans United Front, NOF, and being part of Youth Economic Social Structure, YES, a collective of community members united to improve the well-being of children. These organizations share a common goal: to guide and uplift countless children helping them envision a future where violence is not a solution to their challenges. Annette's mission is to inspire and lead children toward living in peace and fostering respect for their communities. Through collaborations with fellow activists and community leaders, she aims to become a cornerstone in the ongoing efforts to educate, empower, and preserve cultural traditions, ensuring they are passed down from generations to come. Thank you both for joining us today.
You're welcome.
So I know we're excited to begin, and before we jump in, we're going to start with Deputy Superintendent Nicholas Gernon, and then we're going to talk to Miss Cranford Hamilton, who I'm going to call Miss Annette for the rest of the show. But I do want to start with a little bit of a disclaimer. Today, we really want to focus on the updates to the consent decree and all of these consent decree related topics, specifically what happened on Tuesday in court during our fairness hearing and the subsequent Police Community Advisory Board meeting that was held on Wednesday night with Judge Morgan, the Department of Justice, some NOPD representatives, and all the presidents of the Police Community Advisory Boards. So we're really hoping to stay focused on those topics. So just if you're hoping to call in and provide input, we ask that it be on consent decree topics or providing your insight into what happened on Tuesday in court or what you're hoping to see happen next in sustainment, potentially. All right, so with that, let's get started with some basics. Chief Gernon, do you mind telling us what exactly is the consent decree for any of our listeners who's unfamiliar?
Yeah, so just in a nutshell, about 12, 13 years ago, the Department of Justice did a investigation into the police department and identified a number of constitutional violations that comprised, a pattern and practice of wrongdoing on the part of many parts of the department, both structurally and systemically. And so the consent decree was the remedy for that. The consent decree was the solution, if you will. The problems were identified, and the consent decree basically laid out. It's 18 parts, one of those administrative, so it's 17 specific sections that deal with the different deficiencies within the New Orleans Police Department and how the police department needs to remedy those deficiencies. And it's a roadmap, if you will, to how you get to a constitutional, forward-leaning police department.
Thank you. That was a nice elevator pitch on it. And Miss Annette, I am just curious from the community's perspective, what has the consent decree meant to you?
It has meant that the police have been kept in order and under watch in order to fix a problem that has been going on for years prior to the consent decree coming in. So, I mean, when you're talking about a community being just spaced out and told, you have black men getting killed. You have women getting raped. You have all these crimes going on a specific community. So that consent decree came because of all the violence and everything that was going on against the community. And so the police officers that were doing it, and I say all police officers were doing it,
Of course.
but the police officers that were doing it needed to be weeded out and also made to conform and take accountability. We're all here as human beings. We all have equal rights. So we all should be treated equally because the police are to defend the community. And they weren't defending the community, they were abusing the community and everything the community had to offer to it.
Wow, really well said.
Right.
And I think it's important to note that the police is a part of our community.
Yes.
And I think the consent decree in some ways has strived to remind the department of that,
Right.
to make it community focused, community centered, ideally. And
Ideally,
I
yes.
think there's a lot of people that would feel otherwise, but ideally. So when was the consent decree implemented, Chief?
Yep. So the actual documents were signed in January of 2013 under the previous mayor's administration, and the monitoring team was hired a few months later, I think April of 2013, and that's really when the kind of work began in earnest. But it's not a light switch, right? You can't, the old saying, like you can't, butter soggy bread. They had to build a good foundation to put the consent decree on the right track for success. And so, although it started in 2013, you didn't start to really see systemic change and institutional reforms, I would say, until 16 or 17.
I would completely agree with that critique. How long will the consent decree last?
As long as it's needed, right? So the federal judge is the only person that can determine when the consent decree will wind down, but it will be here until the court determines that the consent decree is no longer needed. But the reforms are here to stay. Like that's the important part. The consent decree is not the end all be all. It is now a cultural change that the police department, the way of doing business has been changed, if you will. So when the consent decree eventually winds down, which it's intended to, right? It was never meant to be here forever. As Stella says, it's not our Constitution, right?
Mhm.
It's not a living document. It was a snapshot in time to remedy issues that existed for many decades, and serious issues. There was some horrendous wrongs that were perpetrated by this police department on our community, and we cannot lose sight of that. But eventually, when the consent decree winds down, the intention is that the consent decree had changed the police department's culture and reformed the police department to a way that it cannot go back to the way that it did before. And I don't think the people of New Orleans should or would accept us to go back to the police department of 2006, 2007.
Wow, I feel like a broken record, but well said.
Yeah.
Exactly. I see that we have our first caller. Mr. Ronald, you are on the air on the monitor's mic.
Yes, good evening. Good afternoon. Thanks for taking my call. So when we talk about the consent decree, let's do some history on it. In the 6th District, Nick Garner was part of that. We had 6th District and the Central City Partnership. We were writing How to Be a Good Neighbor. We even published that book. And one of the things happened, community policing started under with our district commander at that time was Tony Camatella. And they met with the community, and we had our concerns. Now, remember, the 6th District had 4 public housing developments at that time. And they had each development had a representative. And at the time that came up, the independent police monitor and the inspector general came as a political piece. We all sat around, we worked on it. And we had some wonderful things in both of those entities. But over the years, and I always advocate, they stripped us for that. Well, I did get an opportunity to get to the legislature. We wrote up some legislation. I think I forwarded to you before on making a state law that we have subpoenaing power. So when we come out the consent decree, which would give us points in the consent decree, that the community is involved and we all are liable. Everybody is accountable, the community as well as the police department as well. Now, on both sides of the stick, we talk about the police corruption in the city. I can tell you the part that I know. That we know in the 6th District, we had ice cream days, we had bicycle days, we had school cops. Before all this came out on community policing, the average police in the 6th District were in our schools. We were a model on how to deal with police, community policing. Again, we have a book that we published with the community and the 6th District Police and how to be a good neighbor. Lieutenant, I think she's a lieutenant now. Yolanda, she finished it up. Nick Garner was one of those ice cream dads as well. So we had this all year long with partnership with Brown's Velvet. We had a walk that went citywide. We started feeding the officers for Mardi Gras. So when I hear the consent decree, nothing is perfect, but nothing is all bad. We had some wonderful things. We had the Concert Kids program. We had Weed and Seed. All of those things happened, and it happened. And of course, we got a black eye. But all of it wasn't gloom and doom. We have some wonderful police in the history of this department, did some wonderful things. And just like any other place in society, some folks make it bad for the rest of us and the ones that's doing right. So, and the consent decree was at its time for its place. But I don't want it to say, have to be saying that the community, mainly we would say Central City community, we had an issue that nothing was going right. We had some wonderful things going on. And if you need a copy, we would like to share through the whole city How to Be a Good Neighbor, Central City Partnership under the leadership of our dear sister, Barbara Layson Kelly. We wrote this whole thing with the police and the community, and everybody had the input. And so I thank you for taking this call, but I also would still like to advocate that we do as much as we can to get legislation on subpoena power for the independent police monitor. That's what we voted for when we wrote that legislation up to get to be a law. So thank you for taking my call, and I hope to see you all real soon.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
calling in. That was really
Thank you.
wonderful historical
All right.
information to have. And it's really important to remember that, yes, we do, when we talk about the consent decree and we talk about our historical understanding of the NOPD, yes, we do tend to doom and gloom, right?
Right.
But I think it's really important to remember that that this has always been in the context of New Orleans. And New Orleans, I mean, as an outsider, I will say that I've always admired and loved the sense of community that exists here. And this is a community that is just filled with leaders and filled with initiative. And there is constantly powerful action that's happening. And it's really important to remember that there was really wonderful work that was happening before the consent decree and really wonderful work happening throughout it. And that will happen afterwards. That was entirely community driven through these really strong relationships that the community developed with the police department and vice versa. So thank you for noting that, and thank you for the support on that. on seeing our office be empowered, we really appreciate all of that.
May I add to what Mr.
Yes.
Coleman had said?
Yes.
So the things that was happening in Central City under when Mr. Coleman and Captain Canatella were working together were great. One of the problems we have is, though, we don't want it to be personality driven. We don't
Yes.
want you to have a good
Yes.
district because you have a good captain, right? We want the system to produce good districts and good district relationships and good relationships with the community. And so that was, yeah, there were good people doing good stuff, but everybody deserves a good relationship with their district, and every community deserves good policing and good police services. And that was one of the things that I think that this document tried to reform, was that it wasn't based on whether the person in place was a good or bad commander.
That is very
point.
true. That is a very good point.
And especially, just like you said, Chief Gardner, about it not being based on the leadership. You want everyone to have the same experiences in their districts. So that is a very good point.
Yeah, everybody deserves good police service.
Right.
Yeah, and I agree with that, but you can't have one district or two districts doing
It
good.
has to be
Good.
It
everyone.
needs to
Agreed.
be all of them doing
Absolutely.
good, especially for the community to recognize that every community, every district
Yeah.
is being treated fairly.
I agree.
We don't want just two districts working hard and dealing with the community and being able to be accountable and get along with the communities.
Absolutely.
We want all of the districts to come together and work off the same agenda, have the same plan, treat everybody equally as we should be. Because I'm not from here either. I've been here almost 20 years, but I am New Orleans. My whole family, my husband, born and raised in the community, my grandchildren. So I am in the community. I'm fighting for my community because I live here. My roots are from New Orleans. So this is my community that I fight for. And I just want to have everyone treated equally because that's what we deserve.
Yeah, I agree.
So can't just be one or two. And we're not saying everything that the police department is doing is wrong. We're not saying they haven't met some of the consent decree orders. What we're saying is what we see and what we know and what we've been asked to participate in is not fulfilling the entire consent decree. So that's what we want to see. We want to see what are you doing to fulfill the orders of the consent decree.
So that brings us to an important question. What does full and effective compliance mean?
Yeah. So that's a very good question. And the reality is that the court decides what full and effective compliance looks like. Our job, the police department's job, is to deliver services to the community and do so in a manner that is consistent with not just the consent decree, but with the community's expectations. The consent decree is like the floor, right? But that's not where we're staying at. But it really is the court's decision as to what that looks like. It is our role to deliver those services and then demonstrate proof of those services. And then the court will decide whether that meets muster or not. And if it doesn't, then we expect that the monitoring team will tell us where are the deficiencies. What are the metrics, If you're on the 5-yard line and you need to get to the goal line, you need to tell me I got 5 yards to go. And then we can come up with a plan to get to that goal line.
Okay.
So let's switch a little gears here, and let's talk a little bit about what happened in court on Tuesday. And so, Chief Gardner, can you tell us exactly what is a fairness hearing?
Well, it was basically the court's opportunity for the public to be heard verbally. So the court has been accepting written comments on the consent decree since September 27th, and the court continues to accept those comments, even though the court has extended the deadline multiple times. I think 3, maybe 4 times.
Yes.
However, if you sent in a comment today, I can assure you that the court would consider that comment. But the fairness hearing was much like at the beginning of the consent decree when they had a public hearing that the public was allowed to come in and firsthand accounts to the court as to the suffering that the community had experienced under the police department. In the same regard, the community was invited to come in and give the court feedback on whether the NOPD deserves to move to the sustainment period, whether the sustainment plan is sufficient to address the issues that are still lingering out there and whether the NOPD has lived up to its obligations and its promise to the community.
Beautiful recap. I want to quickly just provide some input on the concept of sustainment and just quickly say for any of our listeners who are listening, sustainment would be the next phase that the NOPD would enter if they were found to be in full and effective compliance with the consent decree, or if they are allowed to transition into sustainment even without necessarily reaching those benchmarks. And the sustainment strategy or plan that Chief Gernon just referenced is the one that was released to the public. It's still available on the Consent Decree Monitor's website, on NOPD's website, and I believe on the court's website. And that's what Chief Gernon is talking about when he says if you want to submit comments on that strategy, or if you want to submit comments on NOPD's performance, there is still an opportunity to do that. Please still feel free to do that. Now, on Tuesday, as Chief Gernon highlighted, we had our fairness hearing. This is now, I believe, the second fairness hearing that was held by the court. The first one was at the beginning of the consent decree to kind of give us an idea of our baseline of where we were in terms of the community perspective on the NOPD. And then now, as we reach potentially the end of the consent decree, this was another opportunity to gather public feedback in a court setting. So, can you describe for anyone who wasn't able to be present in court, what did that hearing format look like?
Yeah. So I'll paint the picture. It was
Please.
court. So you have the city at the one table, the U.S. Department of Justice, the consent decree monitors at another table as opposing litigants, if you will. And then there was a podium in the middle, and people could sign up, much like you did at city council, right? You put in a card that you want to speak, and you would be called to the podium, and you would speak directly to the judge. She was sitting at her bench, and you were given 5 minutes to give the judge almost like a piece of your mind, right? Which is very unusual that a judge of any level will ask the community to comment on a court case. But I think it shows that this court and this judge recognizes that this isn't just some case that she's handling on her docket. This process is going to impact the city of New Orleans and its residents for decades to come. And so I think that she wisely decided that it wasn't enough just to have the ability to send in emails. It wasn't enough to have public meetings. It wasn't enough to have public forums. It wasn't enough to ask for feedback, but that she needed to hear it directly from people so that she could hear their thoughts and their pleas and their voices. And as we were saying earlier, I think she has a really tough decision to make. I think that the public brought a lot of information to the court, and now the court will have to work its way through that information.
And even though the people or the public were allowed to give their comments or their thoughts, were there any responses to these comments or thoughts
By the court.
by the court? Yeah.
Just one that I can recall. The court asked one of the speakers who represented the state of Louisiana to supplement their comments with some facts, right? So the
Right.
person gave some numbers on costs, and the court asked her to supplement the record with, where'd you get those numbers from? I suspect they got them from the Louisiana Legislative Auditor's report that was issued last month that had those numbers in it. But it was more of the court's listening session. It was more of the court to hear and not necessarily to speak.
Right.
So I just want to make sure that all of our listeners are aware. That meant that there weren't, none of the speakers were sworn in.
Correct.
They didn't take a witness stand.
There was not sworn testimony. There was not a challenging or cross-examination, if you will, to,
Right.
If you think of court, right, you usually get up there and you have somebody brings you out on direct the information you want to give, and then somebody cross-examines it to test the veracity of the statements.
Right.
There was none of that. It was a open opportunity for people to speak whatever their mind was in whatever way that they felt comfortable doing.
So, Miss Annette, what was it like for you to sit in the courthouse and hear fellow community members take the podium?
Well, that part was great. I think that everyone got up there with an agenda. There were groups that got up there and commented as individuals, but they had records, they have stats all together, and great speeches. and great comments.
You know, that is very true. For people who weren't able to attend, what Miss Annette is referencing is that some people got up there with some very researched.
Yes,
Very
Comments.
prepared
Okay.
answers.
Yes,
Very
Yeah.
well
prepared.
prepared.
I mean, we were hearing information about clearance rates.
Mhm.
We were hearing information about caseloads of detectives. We were hearing information about use of force data. I mean, it was very
It was
interesting.
very good. Yeah.
But as Chief Gernon highlighted, none of this information was also challenged or verified. So we were accepting it on face value.
Correct.
Was there any information that was given that you feel needed to be further parsed out or questioned or challenged or verified in any way?
Yes. I think it's the gentleman from the FOP.
FOP? Okay, so for anyone listening, that's the Fraternal Order of Police.
Excuse me, FOP, I'm sorry.
Mhm.
Yes, and I think that by him getting up there saying how closely they've been working with the community,
Mhm.
I didn't believe it. And I think he needed to have some proof as to what he was talking about, because when he said it, most of us in the audience were like, well, when did that happen? When did you guys come out and have a forum and you invited the community? And I don't mean invite a community on your website.
Mm.
You know, we have our meetings with we have our meetings, and we don't just invite on the website. We go to people handing out flyers. We do social media. It's like we let the public know what's going on. So if you're having these meetings with the community, to have the meetings with the community and don't stick to one side. Go to the wards. Make sure you're visible in the wards, and we can see you working with the community or meeting with the communities. Those are the most important communities for me, because that's where we need the help, and we haven't seen that.
Okay. So Chief Gernon, I'll ask the same question to you. Did you feel, sitting there and listening to all the speakers, because I saw you taking notes and listening, was there anything that was said that you feel maybe needed a second look or you would like more information about?
Yeah. There was a presentation by a few statisticians, and I'll call out their names, by NOCOP, and we have reached out to them in the past, and we actually talked to them right after the hearing and said, hey, look, if you're looking at this data in a different light, we'd really like to work with you to understand, from what perspective are you looking at this data? And one of the things that they said was, this is not the way that you should be looking at the data. You should be looking at it this way. It was just pointed out to me recently, NOPD didn't pick the way that we looked at the data. The Department of Justice hires an expert, and that expert told the NOPD, here's how you do the analysis for use of force, bias-free policing, things of that nature. And we have to do the way that we were told. However, let's all admit, just because one expert says that there's a way to do it, doesn't mean that there's not other ways to do it, right?
Right.
So we have reached out to, and they're considering working with us to say, look, there's other ways to look at this data. If we are able to kind of collaborate with them, which I hope we are, we will have to go back to the court and the Department of Justice and say, hey, look, we have this other way of looking at the data, and they will have to approve us looking at the data in that way.
Okay.
That's the kind of things that the consent decree slows us down on, is that to change a process or policy takes a substantial amount of review and approval in order to allow us to do it. May I give you an example of that, just as
Of
a
course.
little bit
Yeah,
more
I
real
think
life
this
one?
is very helpful because
Yes.
I don't know if people understand how the sausage is made
Yeah.
in terms of
Yeah.
this side of the consent decree.
Yeah.
So this would be very helpful.
There was a city council member a few months ago where it got rowdy, a city council meeting where it got rowdy. I
Okay.
don't remember the month. If you do, just help me so that I can give you some framing on this. And officers had to use force, and people were arrested.
Oh, that's right.
Right?
Mhm.
And that happened. And so there was an investigation. And one of the things we looked at was, hey, look, the officers that work in the city council meetings, they
Right.
don't wear body-worn cameras.
Right.
And one of the first things they said was, well, we would really like to.
Mhm.
We think that that would be helpful for us to piece together the puzzle as to, and this ever happens again.
Mm-hmm.
So we drafted up a policy pretty quickly after that, maybe a week or two after that, and sent it up for review from the Department of Justice and the federal monitors, and said, look, we'd like to add to this part of this policy that the people that are working city council meetings, the officers wear body-worn cameras. And if you know the month that happened, and you know that 2 weeks later we sent up this policy, I'll tell you that we're still waiting. And,
Right.
and I email them pretty regularly saying, hey, look, any updates on this? And
Yeah.
and I've got a response like, we're still looking at it. it's not the people that I'm talking to's fault, right? They all have bosses and bosses and bosses, and it's
Right.
got to go up and down their chain of command. It's got to be reviewed and vetted. All I want to do is put body-worn cameras on the officers that are working city council meetings.
Right.
Right.
That's the big change I want to make, and I think that we, that there's not a downside to that.
It's definitely
And
not.
we put some parameters in place, right? Like when city council goes into executive session and they're speaking in confidential manners, our officers wouldn't turn the cameras
Of
on.
course, of
But
course.
while they're in the public, interacting with the public, we want those protections from members of the public as well as our own officers. We are not able to move as quickly or be as nimble to changing conditions on the ground because before we implement a policy or procedure, it has to be reviewed and vetted by everybody up and down. Sometimes that's a great thing because sometimes we get like 10, 12 very smart people looking at our ideas and then helping us enhance them and make them better. Sometimes, and in this instance, I think is a good example, it's a hindrance.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yes.
I mean, if the NOPD is trying to be responsive to the immediate needs of the community, then yes, it
Yeah.
can feel like a hindrance.
Yeah.
Because that does feel like a win. You know, often when I'm talking about the consent decree, I compare it to, I don't know if people remember that visual that came out when the tanker got stuck in the Sioux Canal.
Yes.
And it was perpendicular to the direction of the canal.
Mhm.
And they were talking about how long it was going to take to correct the direction of this tanker. I wish I could show everyone on the radio what that photo looked like. It was pretty surreal. And it was one of those things where it was literally like backing up. It looked like 3 inches, moving forward 3 inches, backing up 3 inches to change the direction of this huge tanker. And that's sometimes how it feels to be able to push through policy changes with a consent decree.
Yeah.
And you know, it keeps you from being reactionary, from maybe doing something that might be
Which is
considered,
good,
which is good,
but it keeps you from
from
Being
being
proactive.
responsive,
responsive.
which is bad.
Not so good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we talked a lot about the community members that got up and spoke. But were there any governmental representation there?
So the head of the fire department and the number 2 in the EMS asked if they could also speak, and they the same as everybody else. They put in a card. You see, they didn't get to go first, right? They got put in the card. They waited in line.
That's true.
They got
did
up
wait
there.
line.
They said their piece, their experience in working as our sister agencies with this. I feel like that was the only 2 maybe from the government, but you guys tell me if I'm missing
The
something.
state AG,
Yeah.
The
so
state
the
attorney general.
attorney general,
I'm sorry, yep. The
they
state attorney
sent a
general got up.
representative, and they also put in a card. They were not given any
Correct. Special.
special
Or
treatment.
anything, yeah.
So, Miss Annette, from your perspective, what was it like hearing other city agencies weigh in on these issues?
Well, I think that the agencies are going to defend one another. I just wish they had gotten up there and spoken because they are also part of the community. They live in communities. So I wish they had spoken more about their feelings about what's happening in their communities and related more to us. Instead of, everything I heard just sound like, wool being pulled over everyone's eyes because they were only there defending. But let's get up there and be truthful. What is actually happening in the community you live in? And how are things in your community? You are with state agencies. So you're a fire captain. You know what's happening in that community that you're working in.
Right.
So I just feel like they should have spoken more as community members rather than so much community leaders. Well,
Interest-
agency leaders.
No, I know. Interesting point. Instead of speaking from your official capacity,
Right.
remember that you're a human first.
First.
Well,
Yes.
yeah, that fair critique. Fair critique. So, big picture, what were some of the takeaways that you had, Miss Annette, from this hearing? What did you hear? Big picture.
Big picture, it's not over yet.
That big picture,
Yeah,
you
we-
think the consent decree is not over yet?
Yeah, I think it still needs to go on. I still think, I think that it needs to be more accountability. It needs to be more addressing of why the police feel that they should be out of it. Just show us documentation. Communicate with us why you think you shouldn't be in it. And I think we need to come together with other groups, NO for one, my organization, New Orleans United Front, as well as NOCOP, Tony's organization. I think we all should come together, and we would like to come together and work with you. We're not fighting against you.
Oh, I don't think.
Yeah, we
we're
just
not on
want to make
opposition.
sure that the community is going to be taken care of. I mean, I'm out here doing community work for my grandchildren and all the other children in in New Orleans.
Yeah.
Because I want them to be able to grow up in an environment that's going to be safe and fair. So we just ask that you give us more accountability, more records, more research about why you think you should come out of the consent decree, and maybe we can agree on why you should go into sustainment, because right now we don't.
What does accountability look like to you, Ms. Annette?
I'm sorry, what
What does accountability look like when you say that? What is that?
with the issues that are in the consent decree? How are you accounting for all of them
I see.
to say that you should be out? And nobody's
the
perfect.
evidence? What's the
Yeah,
evidence?
nobody's perfect. Nothing is perfect. Your agency is not perfect. We as a community is not perfect. We're not asking for perfection. We're asking for accountability, because your agency is not going to be 100% of that consent decree. There's no way. So we want to see if you're 80%. Let's see where you're 80% at. And I'm not talking about the numbers that the researchers tell you what to say and how to account for everything. I'm talking about from working with the community. Come out, hang out with us. Come to our meetings. We have a meeting once a month. They have meetings. OIPM has meetings. Come out and join us. Be at these meetings and show us and get up there and talk and tell us why you think you're protecting this city the way you should. That's
fair.
all.
That's
Yeah.
that's good. And somebody just commented, good point. Yeah, I agree. Good point. And I see that we have a caller, Mr. Petit. Let's put him on. Hi, you're on the monitors, Mike.
How's everybody doing?
All right.
All right, I got a couple of things. First of all, let me get to this EMS man. He stood up there and said what the company told him to say. The EMS man, he has never been in the community as the fire chief. And so when I asked him why did he make that comment, he said that's what they told him to say. And let's talk about the ambulance man. They just went in there and said what they was told to say. So at the end of the day, they don't even matter to me. Now, with Susan Morgan is a waste of the community time. And I'm going to tell you why. Community have wrote her for 11 of the last 12 years. She never responded to one letter. Now, I give her credit for having the fairness hand, but that's just one time out of 12 years. At 12 years. Now, Susan Morgan heard about the Jay Banks case with me. She heard about the Brandon Boutain case with me. She know about the covers up of the assault, the domestic unit, and the rape unit, and how they are molesting kids and getting away. 2014, we went through the same thing. We're in 2024. We are going through the same thing. So that's another reason. But let's talk about these PCAPs. Now, we got how many PCAPs? Like in 7 districts, right? The PCAPs don't work. Haven't worked in 12 years. 12 years. And if they was being fair, how you want to get out a consent decree when you put a motion in and you don't even got the PCAPs in the motion? That's my take on it. And then when we talk about these PCAPs in the consent decree, what do it say? The PCAP should be what? An independent board. How can there be an independent board when you got people that work for the mayor, people that work for city government sitting on the PCAPs, and they're not community. They're not, I say again, community. So at the end of the day, now that they made a new committee of cops to oversee, that's what they said, to oversee the PCAPs. So why, if they're independent, why they're making this new committee with cops? Look like the independent monitor should be running the PCAPs because people trust her. All that board crap, that's a waste of our time. Now, Susan Morgan didn't already made her decision. She was just wasting the people's time. Because if she was a fair judge, she's supposed to stand for who? The community. The community. Susan Morgan, having looked at, she never came to a meeting. She never heard from the community. This data they're talking about is the worst data I ever saw. The Department of Justice, the federal monitors, all them are full of donkey doo-doo. So I got something for them. This is what I think should happen. Everything the NOPD is not doing, they should hold them to And if they say they're doing great and they can prove it to the community, let them out. Now let's fire the monitors and give the money to the police monitor. That'll cut down the money and give the police monitor the accountability and the transparent, somebody we know going to get the job done. Now these federal monitors that violated every law, they got a conflict of interest because they had the lethal program, they had the able program. So you're telling me you're supposed to be watching the cops and evaluating the cops, and then we find out you hiring cops in your two secret programs. It's a disgrace, unacceptable. And if Susan Morgan was a fair judge right there, she'd have said, wait a minute. You're telling me y'all got two private programs going on and they're not holding them accountable for the able and lethal program, but the same officers you're in charge of to make sure they're doing accountability and transparency, they're working in two secret programs, so they're getting paid twice. So at the end of the day, Susan Morgan is a pack of baloney. Tell her no, they said that. Because at the end of the day, is a violation because it's a conflict of interest. Right there, no sustainability or nothing should be done because the program, they've been in the consent decree 15 years. And if they have a conflict of interest and they're making money using another program, that's a violation of the consent decree. Now, my other problem is we got an officer, a personal injury attorney, Eric Carter. Eric Carter then violated the consent decree. He had no business to sign on another investigation, and they didn't hold him accountable. Come up to going on. So they're not ready to get out that. Now, we know the consent decree costs a lot of money, but I'm saying, Belden Noonan Man Baptiste is saying, give it to Stella. Get rid of the monitors. They had a conflict of interest. They violated the law, and nobody hold them accountable. So how you want the community to trust the monitors or trust the judge when she know they got a conflict of interest with the lethal and able program? Nick Garnon, you're doing a great job, brother. I don't care nobody see. You're doing a great job because I saw you. You brought the package. You have been doing a great job. So you ain't on the newly hit list. But the rest of them is a disgrace. It's unacceptable with the consent decree. And I think we should remove Susan Morgan. Thank y'all.
Thank you so much for calling in. And man, you said a lot. So I'm gonna just respond to one point real fast just to make sure that it gets its time. One thing that Mr. Batiste brought up was some concerns about conflicts of interest that might exist with our federal monitors and with some of their outside employment that they have and how they've engaged former or present NOPD officers in those endeavors. And so he brought up ALEFA, that is Effective Law Enforcement for All, and ABLE, which is a active bystander program out of Georgetown University that was started by Jonathan Arney. ALEFA, Effective Law Enforcement for All, was started by David Douglas. Those are our two lead federal monitors, and they have appointed NOPD officers, former and current, to like their board or to actually work for them in separate contracts that they have going on. So that's what Mr. Batiste was bringing up. And that just, I wanted to highlight that only because this public comment period that happened at the fairness hearing was a chance for the public not just to critique the NOPD's performance in the consent decree, but to also critique the federal monitor's performance and truthfully even the performance of local oversight under the consent decree and how we've all done in serving our community and in achieving the goals of the consent decree. So it really was an open forum to be able to bring up all of those concerns. Now, Mr. Batiste brought up our police community advisory boards, and I do want to have a chance to ask Chief Kernan about a meeting that was held between Judge Morgan, the Department of Justice, and the leaders of those police community advisory boards.
So I just want to say, first off, I'm very glad I'm not on Belden's hit list. I really appreciate that.
Good place to be.
Yes.
High praise from a hard critic.
And look, I appreciate that he tells us where our warts are, right?
Yeah.
I don't need somebody telling me how great we are.
Right.
I need somebody telling me what we need to get better at.
Right.
True.
So,
True.
do you want to transition into PCABs or?
Yeah, we would love to ask you about what that meeting was like, because I know it was invite only. So can you give us an insider's perspective on what happened on Wednesday night?
Yep. So, in addition to the fairness hearing this week, the court also set up a separate meeting on Wednesday evening at like 5 p.m. to allow members of the Police Community Advisory Boards, I'll just call them PCABs, to come and speak directly to the court and express what's working, what's not, and where they think it needs to be improved, and what they think needs to be replicated because it's successful, and to almost act as a brainstorming session as to how do we make PCABs more relevant and more impactful. And so that was basically what occurred on Wednesday evening. I think we were there for 2.5 hours, maybe.
Yeah, it felt like almost
Yeah.
3.
Yep.
It was a long meeting. I
So-
was there too. That's why I'm
You were.
laughing, yeah.
Yep. So from about 5 p.m. till
Yeah.
was ever there to 8.
Oh,
And I think that there were 6 of the 8 PCABs had representation.
Yes, the
2 of them.
7th was not there,
And the
the 4th was
Yep.
not there.
And each PCAB was allowed to share their experiences with the judge and with the court, without a filter, without a gatekeeper, which I think is important.
and in some of the feelings that they share, what were your main takeaways or
Oh,
the
it was
feedback
so
you got
mixed.
from them?
Some of them were like, "This is great, everything's great," and some were like, "This is dysfunctional, and this is horrible, and everything's horrible." Right? So again, in trying to replicate success and minimize failure, that helped us kind of figure out, okay, well, what's going well in the places that it's great, and what's not going well in the places that it's not going well. And we also solicited feedback on the PCAB sustainment plan that Belden had referenced, because so far we've only gotten 2 emails on it. No, there were 2 thoughtful emails. There were 2.
Public,
Wait,
take note.
2 emails?
Only
Two.
2 emails have come in about the PCAP plan.
Correct.
I have talked to
Wow.
many people that have strong opinions about that PCAP plan, so please,
If you're-
let's email them in.
If you're not getting your comments to the court, then the court can't consider that.
Right,
So
right.
2 emails have come in. They were good. They had a lot of like, all right, here's like, they listed out bullet points, like, here's some things you should be doing. But I don't want 2 people's voices to be the voice of the community when the court's
Right.
looking at this matter. And I think that was important, that these PCABs were allowed to speak directly to the court. But I think that people that aren't on PCAB that have concerns about PCABs should avail themselves to that mechanism to give their thoughts to the court on that.
So what did the PCAP say weren't working?
Lack of resources was a consistent message from not all, but many of the PCABs.
Many.
Right? So like, police department's not helping, or the city, right? Because this also involves neighborhood engagement office.
Yes.
And
Why
so-
does it involve them? Can you be
because
clear?
the police department is not supposed to oversee or tell the PCABs how to operate. Neighborhood engagement office is supposed to help them operate. And so
Really?
the neighborhood engagement office is really where the PCABs get a lot of their direction and their direction from. So the neighborhood engagement office, one of the concerns about them from the city, including the police department, not having access to just make copies of agendas, not having access to meeting spaces that weren't police stations.
Yeah.
Not having access to serve refreshments.
Right.
If you're going to have a meeting at 6 p.m., I think it's reasonable that you would think that you're going to have some
Definitely.
refreshments to serve.
You have to feed them.
Yeah. So the resourcing of PCABs was a concern. The communications breakdown between some PCABs and some districts was brought up, although other districts and other PCABs said that they were lockstep, hand in hand.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting dynamic to hear.
It was a funny mix. I have to say I was very surprised to hear from the PCABs. Some of them said that their district captains were extremely engaged. I'll give them their roses, but the PCAB for the 8th district said that
Yep.
Captain Roberts has been very engaged and listened to their very robust and detailed recommendations, and they highlighted that they gave a lot of recommendations regarding public safety concerns and how they communicate out public safety plans regarding shootings. And they highlighted the shooting that happened at the Republic in the CBD. And they said that that was an area where they wanted to see the district better communicate out with the community what they were doing to address that and what their safety plan was moving forward. We also heard from the 5th District. They also applauded their leadership. They said that their district leadership, Captain Dupree, was very engaged. Dupree Hill?
Yeah, Dupree Hill. Yep.
Dupree Hill was very engaged. And then, but then we also heard the flip side that their districts
Some
were
districts-
not supporting them.
Yeah, they would show up for meetings, and the officers didn't know what a PCAB meeting was and told them, you can't have a meeting here.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a failure. Now,
That
they
is a
mentioned
real
the
failure.
officer, the captain, who's not in that district anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So but we certainly circled back the next day to make sure that
Yeah.
the people in that district that are running that district now were aware of that criticism, because that needs to be fixed.
Yes.
Like yesterday fixed. And we connected that PCAB president to the assistant commander of the district, only because the district captain's out with medical right now. So we connected with the assistant commander, and we told them to start building a relationship,
Right.
start having conversations.
And I just want to make it clear, because we mentioned how PCABs are actually under neighborhood engagement, and then Stella mentioned how 8th District and 5th District, both PCABs both were saying how their captains were very engaged with them. Let's be clear on what is NOPD's role with the PCABs.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. So you asked 10 different people that, you might get 10 different answers. So here's mine. To listen to community concerns, to receive recommendations, and to provide feedback or resolution of those recommendations is the baseline. Secondarily, to assist PCAB members in understanding what resources might be out there, or how the process works, or how the police department's process works, so that PCAB members can then more effectively communicate to our community how to resolve issues, right? And then maybe building on that to help resource them. So if somebody needs a meeting space, every district has a station, every district has a meeting room. Now, if people don't want to meet there, we understand that, but then I would say that our community liaison officers would, I know most of them, would very likely help them connect to a library or a Nord Sea facility, right? So there are other city-owned facilities that are not police stations. But like I said, it's interesting that what is the police department's role in PCABs? I hear over and over again, well, the police department's not supposed to tell PCABs what to do, and the PCABs are supposed to be independent. Yeah, I agree. 100% I agree. I don't, if that's happening somewhere, if there's a feeling about that, then we need to drill down on where and why that's happening, because there's a difference between being a partner and being a director, right?
I want to ask a question. Does the police department organize their dates for their meetings for
No,
PCAB?
we just ask them to tell us when they're having it so we can put it on our website so people can know.
Okay, no, okay.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. I just wanted to know if you had anything to do with the scheduling of their meetings.
No, ma'am.
Okay.
Well, I think an important takeaway from that PCAB meeting was that the PCAB leaders felt a pressure to perform to expectations that they didn't fully understand. So when Chief Gernon said, if you ask 10 different, individuals, district captains about, what they think their role is supposed to be, you might get 10 different answers. Similarly, if you ask the PCAB leaders,
I meant 10 different people generally, not just
General-
police.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the PCAB leaders were also seeking some clarity, saying, who do we report to? Who
Right.
do we work for? Like, what is our role? What's our purpose? What do we consider a successful PCAB to be? What do we consider successful community interactions to be? What type of recommendations should we be putting forward? And some of them expressed real confusion around, should we be advising the police department, or should we be critiquing them?
Right.
Are we partners? Are we adversarial? What is our mission? And what is the tone that we're supposed to be bringing to that mission?
It's my hope that in 2025, the city neighborhood engagement office hired a full-time person to manage PCABs. In the past, that person had maybe 5 or 6 different jobs within the neighborhood engagement office, and the city created a position that was just to help PCABs be successful. And the person that they hired for that role is the person that has been helping manage PCABs, but manage PCABs and 5 or 6 other different things. So now that we have the single person with that is their only job is to make PCABs successful, I'm hoping that that is the beginning. It is not the solution. It is not a corrective action plan. It is just step one on a corrective action plan to help make PCABs more robust and more impactful, because now the person that's helping them navigate this will also have, that's their sole focus.
All right.
And I see
think
we
that's-
just got a comment from our PCAP president in the 1st District that a working committee to develop a real PCAP sustainment plan must include PCAP members and the community. And I think that's a very fair comment, critique, and reminder that the PCABs, we have to look at what's working for the PCAB members. We have to look at what would work for the community. And truthfully, we also need to ask the district captains and make sure that we're considering what would work for you. What are you trying to get out of these community interactions? What are you trying to get out of these PCAB meetings? So, and that they should post dates for meetings at the beginning of the year. I think that's a good suggestion too.
People can plan it out a lot easier.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, this has been so interesting. Time has really flown. I
I
can't believe
know.
we're at an hour now.
There was so much more.
I know.
I know.
Miss Annette, before we sign off, I just think it's important. Do you mind plugging when's the next New Orleans United Front meeting for anyone who's interested, or how do they get involved for anyone who's listening and wants to now get involved?
Okay, the next meeting, January, is going to start our meetings on the last Monday of
The
the
last
month.
Monday of the month.
Okay.
And we're normally over at Chuck's Cafe Istanbul
Okay.
on St. Claude. And you can call
Right in the Healing Center.
Yes, the Healing Center. You can call 504-266-8665, or you can call 504-458-5809 if you would like more information.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Well, that wraps up today's episode of The Monitor's Mic. I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to all our listeners for tuning in and staying engaged with the crucial conversations we're having about police oversight and community safety. A really special thank you to Deputy Superintendent Gernon and Miss Annette Cranford Hamilton for their time and invaluable insights they've shared making today's show possible. If you missed any part of today's show and want to catch up on past episodes, visit our website at www.nolaipm.gov. You can find and follow us on YouTube at NOLA IPM, and you can also follow us on social media for updates and news on Instagram at NOLA OIPM and on Facebook at New Orleans Independent Police Monitor. Until next time, stay informed, stay involved, stay committed to building a safer community, and happy holidays. I don't know. Enjoy your families and everyone else. And I'm Chriselle Williams, and with me is Stella Cement, and this has been The Monitor's Mic.
Hey folks, what's up? It's Gerard Stevenson. Coming up, it's the Reality Check on WBOK.
WBOK 1230 AM New Orleans.